Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China's first Ad5-nCoV COVID-19 vaccine produced by CanSino Biologics was rolled out on February the 25th. It is the only single-dose COVID-19 vaccine given conditional approval for rollout in China. But what is this vaccine and what is the difference between single-dose and double-dose vaccines? And will those vaccinated be immune to mutated strains of the virus? For the first part of the program, I'll be talking to Dr. Xuefeng Yu, Chairman and CEO of CanSino Biologics Inc. And for the second part, I'll be joined by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, and via Skype by Dr. Mohammed Munir, a virologist and lecturer in biomedicine, health, and medicine at Lancaster University. That's our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. Now let's talk to Dr. Xuefeng Yu, Chairman and CEO of CanSino Biologics Inc. Dr. Yu, compared to most of the vaccines on the market here in China, which require a double dose, and also somewhere else, CanSino's COVID-19 vaccine is actually single dose. So can you tell us why you can make it a single dose, and what is the advantage of that?
Well, first of all, it's due to the mechanism of action. So as you are aware, our vaccine is viral vector-based coronavirus vaccine. The mechanism of action is to deliver the genes into human cells and expressed from the intracellularly and express it to the cell surface. It stimulates both antibody and cell-mediated immune response, and it could express it for some time. So given that nature of the vaccine design, it doesn't require adjuvant. It doesn't really need to be boosted in the short term. So that's the the scientific rationale, especially in the pandemic situation, when to stop the pandemic, people need to act quickly. And hopefully one shot will work, and that will effectively block the transmission and will effectively stop the pandemic, the virus spread out.
About the effectiveness, I know that more than 18,000 in Pakistan have been vaccinated with CanSino's vaccine. And can you tell us the protection rate, and what do you make of the number?
Well, our clinical trial, phase 3 clinical trial design is strictly follow the WHO guidelines. So we have conducted trials in 5 countries, include Pakistan, Russia, Chile, Mexico, and Argentina. Up to now, we have over 40,000 subjects or people immunized. Based on the design of the trial, we have half of the people immunized with vaccine. Another half is so-called the placebo, which is basically something else without any vaccine components in there. So then we will follow up all the immunized people to see how many people will get infected by the coronavirus. Especially after 28 days, which is our primary endpoint. So we also follow, every day. So the secondary endpoint is 14 days. We want to see how early the vaccine will take effect. So based on our clinical trial protocol, when we have over 100 people which attract disease, we will do an interim data analysis that allow us to see how effective of the vaccine is. Basically, there's a team who will analyzing this 100 subjects to see how many of those infected people are from the vaccinated group, vaccine group, how many from the placebo group. So that's where the number come out. Based on those, the ratio, we have demonstrated globally, we have roughly 67% effectiveness. That means if we have 100 people immunized, we see, compared to the, I would say, from placebo versus immunized subject, the people who attract disease from a placebo group is much, much higher than the immunized group. So that's the ratio come out. I'm more impressed by the severe disease prevention. From all vaccine groups, we have over 90% that effectiveness to prevent severe disease of COVID-19. Yeah.
You talked about the effectiveness rate is 67%, but 90% against severe illnesses. How do you look at the numbers from other vaccine candidates like Pfizer and Moderna? Their effectiveness is more than 90%, of course, but storage conditions is a higher bar for them. Is that the case, that there is a trade-off between effectiveness and storage and logistics conditions?
Of course. I think we have to be clear. Their 95% or 90% effectiveness is based on the 2-dose regime. And we are talking about the single dose. I think based on the mechanism of action, I would believe their single dose could be similar to ours, which we see from Johnson & Johnson's Ad5-nCoV vaccine. In terms of the technology of the vaccine storage, our vaccine can only need what we call cold chain storage, 2 to 8 degrees.
Normal refrigeration is okay.
Every vaccine. Sorry?
Normal refrigeration storage is okay. It's acceptable.
That's right. That's right. It's normal refrigeration conditions, which pretty much all the vaccines require that kind of conditions. When we talk about mRNA vaccine, that because as a new technology, I'm sure there will be a further development. But currently, the mRNA vaccine all require over minus 60 at least for storage. And all the stability profile is actually very short. I believe there's some 2 to 8 degrees for a week or so. And well, and that's the advantage of our vaccine, especially for the developing country where the electronic supply or the storage condition may not be as good as in the developed world. Maybe a deep freezer, minus 80 is widely available. However, I think even in US, minus 80 freezer is not that common in all the clinical settings.
And talking about single dose, Johnson & Johnson vaccine is the other single shot vaccine to have final stage testing data besides yours. And it's found to be 66% effective globally. So there are many other, as you said, mRNA and inactivated vaccines. So how do you look at the field right now? Is it a competitive field, or is it just different approaches?
Well, if you look at the current leading vaccine development, it pretty much could divide as mRNA, viral vector, inactivated, and subunit. And in terms of mechanism of action, the mRNA and viral vector more or less in the similar way of stimulate human body, the human immune system. The only difference would be the delivery vehicle for mRNA using lipid nanoparticles, while the viral vector were using viral particles. If we look at the inactivated virus, which is the whole virus injecting into body, it was only stimulate antibody response. But mRNA and the viral vector will stimulate both antibody and cell-mediated immune response. So I think that's why you see potentially a single shot of those vaccine may work. When you only have an antibody response, you need a prime and boost. Sometimes you need more than once to boost. Similar to subunit vaccine, in order to have the subunit work better, you need a different adjuvants. Some adjuvants will actually help subunit antigens to stimulate cell-mediated immune response. So it certainly, you see the different technology. I would think if, especially in the pandemic situation, if we can make it simple and make it work quickly, that's the advantage.
About what age group can use vaccines available? Sinopharm and Sinovac's vaccine, they only approve for people under the age of 60 because they lack the data for that age group. What about your candidate? What about your vaccine?
Well, our vaccine is approved for people 18 years above, so there is no upper age limits. The rationale is we have conducted clinical trials, include the elderly people, and the oldest one, as far as my knowledge, we have some people have for 80, over 80, such like 84, when we conduct the clinical trials. And the safety profile is actually pretty good. And also immune response is in the decent range. So with my understanding, actually the inactivated virus, I believe in the mRNA also vaccine, both of them haven't conducted the clinical trials in that age group, 60 years above. So I think they might do the similar clinical trials or for the future expand to that kind of population.
I've done some research. There is one concern about adenovirus vaccine is that adenovirus is actually exists in nature. For those people who are already infected with the adenovirus, then the immune response might be complicated. What do you say to that?
Well, adenovirus is a quite common circulating virus in human. And it does repeatedly infect people. As far as the scientific literature, I think, which actually we did the clinical trial also demonstrate that roughly 70% of the people may have a pre-existing anti-adeno antibodies. People do have a concern whether this pre-existing antibody will impact on the vaccine efficacy. However, as you can see from the clinical data, this vaccine has no much difference from the rare circulating human adeno antibodies such as Janssen's Ad5-nCoV or the vaccines developed by the chimpanzee adenovirus, which is AstraZeneca's version. So all the adenovirus vector vaccines are, I would like to say, more or less in the pretty much similar range in terms of efficacy and the safety profile. So in that regard, I wouldn't think the pre-existing immunity really play a critical role in terms of impact on the vaccine safety and efficacy.
And we understand this virus is still mutating, and they have new variants that pose challenges to us, found in Brazil, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. CanSino has begun research into the new mutated strains.
Well, we're closely watching the change of the epidemiology, and we also have done quite a bit testing to see whether there's a cross-reactivity in terms of immunogenicity with some of the new variants. So far, I think our data suggest almost all those new variants hasn't been really impact on the immune response of our vaccines. However, we are closely watching it, and we are working on the new variants that could potentially really change the vaccine efficacy. As you know, the beauty of the genetic engineering is, you can basically synthesize a piece of gene and insert into the similar or same vector, in fact, like Adeno-5, and replace the existing gene. And that will develop a new version to protect the new variants. So if that happens, we can quickly adapt the new constructs to hopefully maintain the safety and efficacy for the new variants.
So does that mean if the spike protein of COVID virus change remarkably, we still be able to adapt to its change?
Yes, definitely.
And there's another thing that people are worried, how long will the immunity stay in our body? Is it long enough to sustain until COVID is no longer a problem?
Well, that's something we still don't have answer yet. And we will follow up our vaccine subjects in the phase 3 over a year, and we'll see how effective, how long the antibody will stay, or how long the cell-mediated immune response will still effect. So that there's still some work need to be done, and we are planning to do it. We are doing it.
About marketing and distribution, given the fact that there is still insufficient supply, both in terms of production, logistics, and distribution. So what is your plan of giving people the shots in the arms around the world?
Well, that's one of the really important mission that we as a vaccine manufacturer have to consider. In China, as you know, the government has already decided to to vaccinate people with the government our CDC system. So we're part of that mission, and so work closely with the Chinese CDC and try to distribute our vaccine as widely as we can. In terms of international market, I think the Chinese government made very clear the vaccine is a public product and will support wherever is needed. And we are following that guidance and working with international partners, such as the country with Pakistan, Mexico, and many others. And we hopefully, in some part, we can formalize, distribute as a bulk. They can fill locally. That will be more effective. That's exactly what we're doing with Mexico now. But for some of the countries, we may have to deliver as a final product. We are actively building our production capacity, and we will be able to provide as a final product to those countries who have no expertise or facility that will be able to fill for themselves.
I was told that your production capacity can reach 500 million doses in a year. Is that a target? Is that adjustable?
Well, that's our current situation, and we are watch closely the market demand. If there's more demand, we might be further expand the capacity. And I think every company is working on expanding the capacity. We need to work closely, not to waste energy and the time, but be able to effectively supply the market as the market demand growing.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Yu, for your work and for your answers. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. We'll be right back. So, Dr. Mani, I presume that you overheard Dr. Yu's remarks on his vaccines. China has already 4 vaccines, and they are in overdrive to pump up the production and distribution. But there is a common challenge, that is, can they handle the mutated versions? Because we've just heard India has already detected 240 new strains of the virus in recent months. Are you alarmed by this rate of mutation, and will this change the picture of vaccination?
Well, I think this is a really important point because most of the vaccines, those are recommended now and are being used to vaccinate the population. Those being using the spike protein that was available in a very early days, in February, March last year. So this means that the new mutants, if they come along, they will be significantly different than what being used for the vaccine purposes. And we have a strong data in the laboratory and also in animal experiments that many of the new variants, particularly the South African ones, cannot be neutralized by the antibodies raised by these vaccines, or the efficacy is significantly reduced. Although I know that these vaccines are genetically engineered and can be quickly repurposed to adopt with the new variant. However, still it requires the phase 3 trial. If the new antigen is put into these vectors, that will take a longer time. So construction of the vaccine that match to the field virus is not really the problem. Problem is to test this efficacy against those challenged viruses in the real life, and that takes time. So that is really the shortcoming of the current vaccines are.
And will that add another layer of challenges to the vaccination program itself? Because probably in different areas of the world, different strains are spreading in different ways, and that means the rollout will be more complicated.
Yes, absolutely. Not just because the different vaccines are being rolled out, but also once these mutants come, they overwhelm the whole world in relatively shorter time. Look at the British strain. Once it was first identified back in October, within a couple of weeks, it's been reported in many countries within the Europe with a very limited, transportation ongoing at the moment. So once everything is open to this bigger scale, the chances for these new mutants to move into those territories where those not been reported before would be extremely high. So I think this is a space that clearly need to be watched very closely so that we will have a repurposed vaccine and at the right time when it is needed before those mutants spread all over the world.
Are you satisfied with the rollout rate of the vaccines in different parts of the world, especially in America, of course, because the U.S. Food and Drug Administration recently relaxed the storage and transportation temperature for the Fisa Moderna mRNA vaccines. Do you think it is the right way to do?
Well, the reassessment that Pfizer has done onto the storage conditions, that was appropriately done, and the FDA has made all those recommendations that it can now be stored at the regular refrigerator, which certainly help to sort of transport the doses at the places where it cannot be stored at -70 or 80, which was initially anticipated. But I think you raised a very important question, is that whether we are having the rollout of the vaccine at a pace where we need it. Part of the problem here is that if our vaccine rolling out would not match with the mutation rate of the virus, we are allowing the virus to mutate more and more, and that would pose challenge, as we were discussing before, with the vaccine matching, and to really look onto what is the best vaccine for that particular strain. So if our vaccine strategy is to adopt, we called a term called splash vaccination, which means we have to vaccinate the whole world relatively shorter time so that we do not allow this virus to move from one community to another community and mutate, and that would then have a negative impact onto the vaccine efficacy itself.
And John, there is another problem, that is the access to the vaccines. For example, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines cannot be accessed by a lot of developing nations. And some people are asking for those companies, the drug makers, to give out their intellectual property rights. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce said on Tuesday it opposed calls for the World Trade Organization to back a temporary waiver of intellectual property rights of those vaccines. What do you think of this?
I'm quite critical of this movement. I think this is probably putting a one country or a few companies' interests ahead of people's lives in the countries. I think the first priority is still first and foremost about saving lives, and as the doctor said, to vaccinate as many people as possible around the world to contain it very quickly. So I think this kind of attitude is probably questionable. I don't know what is the rationale behind this. It's really about money. This has to be be debated, and hopefully the issue of intellectual property is very important. But when it comes to saving lives, it becomes secondary.
So this is the U.S. government's position, Dr. Munir. Do you think Fisa Moderna can actually make it happen by giving free license to drug makers and vaccine makers in developing world?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a moral responsibility to put the intellectual properties and the business aside and really look on to the public health and the greater good. And I think this is the time where it's a testament of humanity for most of these giant pharmaceuticals that would be having opportunity in other businesses. But at this moment, it is critically important, particularly in the developing countries. I mean, if you look onto the current vaccine strategies in Africa, in many parts of Americas, and in Southeast Asia, more than 100 countries are the ones that have not even received a single dose of the vaccine.
Yeah.
And we should not anticipate that if the developed world are vaccinated, we would be safe. We will not be safe until everybody is safe.
Talking about China's case, China is now exporting its vaccines to a lot of countries, but at the same time, China needs to vaccinate its own populace. According to Zhong Nanshan, the top virologist, pulmonologist in China, he said on March the 1st that he hoped China's vaccination rate could reach 40% as of June. But now, only 3% of the population have been vaccinated. So, John, why the vaccination rollout is so slow here in China?
Well, first of all, I think right now I don't think it's going very slow right now. I mean, in Beijing, a lot of people have been vaccinated.
But far from the target.
That's right. But I think this is going to be a decision really sort of considering the trade-off between vaccinating more people here in China versus saving lives in other countries. After all, China's infection rate is almost next to zero at this point. So the urgency to vaccinate people here in China is probably not as strong as in many other parts of the world that are still seeing wide infection.
So how do you look at the differences of understanding of this problem? Because public health experts obviously believe more vaccinated people is better for the control of the virus, but people are reluctant because they don't feel the need to be vaccinated.
Well, I think that's a quite a different issue here. I think in general, people here in China are not so much opposed to vaccination. I know, for example, in the United States, there's a large group of people, mostly religiously motivated. They're very much vehemently opposed to vaccination. They don't believe in this story, they don't believe in science. But I think here in China, we don't have this big problem. I think if people are told to vaccinate, they probably most likely will. So I think once the production picks up, there will be enough volume for vaccinating here in China. I think the speed here in this country will be really, really speeding up.
Dr. Munir, you also believe that it makes sense for the whole world to be vaccinated, the greater populace. Please be brief.
Yes, absolutely. Until we don't reach to 70% of the world population, we should not claim that we have a handle on this pandemic, and that required efforts, resources, and international collaboration.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Munir. Thank you, John. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Zhou in Beijing. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.